We are here with Mike Roeth, the Executive Director of the North American Council for Freight Efficiency. Mike, thanks for being here. Mike just oversaw the completion of a very big fuel efficiency study called Run on Less that NACFE spearheaded. Why don't you tell us about Run on Less and how it went?
Yeah, so Run on Less was maybe our first big event, Joe. It was highlighting 7 fleets and their tractor trailers and drivers, and we sought to go find some of the most fuel efficient fleets out there that are really getting it done, and we were able to do that. So the run lasted 17 days in the middle of September, ending at the North American Commercial Vehicle Show, and we accumulated, those 7 trucks and drivers accumulated over 50,000 miles, and they did 10.1 mile per gallon. I mean, amazing. Higher than even I thought, and pretty impressive. And it was really maybe most impressive because it came during the hurricanes. So the first week of the run, Harvey was coming up through Texas, and then we had Irma come up the East Coast. And these drivers in these fleets said that the challenge of a lot of wind and unexpected routes, dropping some trailers when, in some cases they had to drop a highly efficient trailer and pick up a dog or a older, less efficient, not the technologies on a trailer. And just the congestion and all that. So, we monitored the conditions that they operated in, and really feel like, first of all, it's real world, but secondly, with the weather and the circumstances, the 10.1 is pretty impressive.
Now, what's impressive about that is you talk about how they had to go from an efficient trailer to a dog. So you're thinking that, wow, we're going to see these numbers come down when we're backing away from the equipment. So how does that get into driver training and driver habits? So in a case like that, where you're saying, okay, well, we can't count on the equipment to really be there to help us, so then it gets down to driver training.
Yeah, first of all, these were 7 awesome drivers. They either picked, so we had a mega fleet in U.S. Express, and we had some fleets around 1,000 trucks, and we had an owner-operator. So we had a mix of size of fleets, but these truckers and these drivers are really impressive. So when challenges are put to them, they want to stay on their A game. They're watching that fuel economy and all their readouts. We had one driver have 4 different coaching tools and readouts in the truck. And so when they're thrown a curveball, like the hurricanes, they work to know how to handle it. So whether that's dropping a trailer, headwinds and tailwinds. We had one truck that literally drove into Harvey, and Irma pushed him a week or so later. On that truck, we saw something like 12.5 to 11.5 mile per gallon, or 12.5 to almost 11 mile per gallon. So a big fuel economy difference. And that's one of the things we're going to start looking at moving forward as we look to produce a report on the run, is what effect does payload and wind and trailers, average speed, or the speed of the truck. Slowing down saves fuel, but how much is too much? And we're going to look through all of this data. We have 99 days of driving amongst these trucks over that 17 days. And we're going to get in and maybe even look at the data by hour to really understand what was going on.
Now, in terms of that kind of granularity too, do you think that you'll find, or did you find, on a day-to-day basis, well, if you had this particular spec, this particular combination of technologies on a, on a rig, that you saw better results, or certain lanes, or certain conditions? Yeah. Did you get down to that kind of granular level? Well,
I think so. We're the run ended a couple of weeks ago, so we're really trying to dive in to understand what we have. It is still only 7 trucks. They did have a pretty good diversity of specifications on them. They all had a lot of aerodynamics, but different aerodynamics. They all had AMTs, but some of the solutions were quite diverse. Axles, 6x4, 6x2, liftable 6x2. We had a 4x2. So we will look to see what we can learn there, but that's really tough, particularly as you look at all these different conditions that they operated under. We're cautious not to call this a test, but we do think this is something in between where fleets evaluate fuel economy and the manufacturers and others do like track testing and more formalized wind tunnel testing. We think we may have found something here with the run-on-less techniques around monitoring some trucks, knowing the conditions they operated in, analyzing the driver performance to really understand what's going on.
So in terms of a range of engine sizes, what do we have there?
Yeah, that's another good one. We had 15 to 11 liter.
Okay.
And so We had 3 truck brands, a couple different engine brands, of course, and different size. We had equal wide base to duals. So, you know, NACFE in our work, we've got 85 technologies that we're watching.
Okay.
Some have already scaled to either standard or very high adoption, and others are just starting to emerge. So we watched and looked at the specs these fleets brought to run on less to understand what combination of those 85 each of them had. And it was a pretty good diversity, which also leads us to believe that, you know, there's not one answer here, that different you know, menus or recipes of technologies can still do very, very well.
And you know, and to that point, and I'd love to hear more about that, because NACFE has done a lot of research dating back several years. I mean, we're talking about downspeeding, we're talking about platooning. You've studied a lot. So where do you think, you know, the future is going? We talk a lot about electrification. We talk a lot about platooning. So what's next? I mean, getting the most out of a traditional diesel-powered truck is important. Nobody thinks diesel's going anywhere, but there's a lot going on, you know, as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I've already been asked, does 10 mile per gallon potential of these diesel tractor trailers, not even call it potential, this is what available technologies that they brought to the table today, does that make the business case for electric trucks or hybridization or some of these more advanced things lower? And so I think if you know, for those who are developing, you know, significantly different tractors, you do have to make to count on the baseline getting better, and so they're going to continue to get better. And so, yeah, we've been studying a lot of technologies. We've done 20 confidence reports, and so we've studied a great deal of the available technologies. We looked into the future a bit with 2-truck platooning and electrification of accessories. And, you know, maybe we'll get involved in some of the more, I don't know, call them maybe like revolutionary things that people are asking about. But it all comes down to, you know, just the good, hard, diligent work that we all know. You know, understand your duty cycle, understand the business case you have as a fleet. Manufacturers talk to fleets, just don't talk to 1 or 2, talk to hundreds, because there's various different duty cycles and business cases out there. And start to work on what makes most sense to you. You know, the higher the speed, the more important aerodynamics are. The lower the speed, tires become really important. They're all important, but depending on how much start and stop you do, miles you travel, dedicated routes versus irregular general freight hauling routes, you know, fine-tune what you operate in or where you're going to sell your products into, and then just understand what's available and work hard on it, always with an attitude towards total cost of ownership rather than being too specific on fuel saved and cost of the device.
Now, it's funny because you see certain things out there that are pretty commonplace now. Trailer skirts have almost just become ubiquitous. I mean, are you finding that certain fleets, or, you know, are fleets gravitating towards certain things over others? Are, you know, like with low rolling resistance tires, are they just too specific to certain duty cycles, like you say? Or?
No, so yes, I mean, so there is the case of, so liftable axles, for instance. I mean, it does require that you haul lighter loads part of your routes to be able to lift the axle. You know, if you're always hauling heavy, that axle will never come up. You've wasted your money on it. So there are some things that I would say become almost standard or on a lot, you know, side skirts and so forth. But don't forget, the engineers are always working. And so, you know, we are starting to see new skirt designs. We're starting to see designs emerge that might replace skirts, you know, and be interesting to buyers. So, you know, as soon as you think something's there and gonna be there, somebody innovates and comes up with something new. And so one of the things that NACFE wants to do is help speed up that whole process. You know, accelerate adoption, accelerate new generations of products, help the manufacturers know where the issues are, help the fleets with all that, and with all that trying to get to this 10, 12 mile per gallon fast.
And you mentioned the North American Commercial Vehicle Show, and electrification was a hot topic. So when you talk about, you know, people coming to you talking about what's next, I mean, we hear a lot about, you know, electric motors on wheel ends, for example, and, you know, maybe some combination where you have, you know, some electric motor pulling the truck and maybe a smaller engine. I mean, it's pie in the sky now, but you never know.
Yeah, we're in some real exciting times. I mean, you know, I think that the 2 areas of a lot of focus, you know, automating, maybe autonomous, possibly self-driving trucks, and electrification, I think have one common thread, and that is that the industry now believes they're possible. So having a truck that can either follow another one autonomously or drive itself, maybe with a driver for a long time, don't get me wrong, but automating that process more and more all the time, electrifying battery costs, power electronics, motors, all are, the costs are down and the performance is up. And I think if you really quiz the engineers, the fleets, the manufacturers, and so forth, just in the last year, both of those have become realistic. And so if it's realistic, then now how do we make it happen? And I think, we've kind of gone from, oh, I don't see that happening. A battery might drive a 2,000-pound car, but it's not going to do an 80,000-pound truck. That's sort of been myth busted, if you will. And I think now they're thinking, it can. And so evidenced in, the truck shows last year, almost all having an autonomous element to it, and now electrification. I think they're both coming, and it'll be a matter for the industry to figure out what's the best duty cycles, applications to start, and then to see how far it goes.
Now, where do alternative fuels fit in?
So, our work at NACFE, I mean, we're wanting to work on energy efficiency. So, in some ways, we don't care what the fuel is. We're going to help it, use less of it. That's our whole focus. Okay. But these alternative fuels bring up interesting opportunities, and we want to help all the trucks be more efficient, no matter the fuel.
So you mentioned that you're going to do a full report on Run On Less. Can you share with us when we might see that full report?
So we're planning, we just figuring out what it is. We're trying to figure out how deep and broad we go with the report, probably in March or April.
Okay.
We have those 99 days of driving. We're going to get in and look at each one of those. We're going to probably look at them by hour. So we'll be looking at wind and payload and performance of each of those truck days by hour, and start to learn something and share that out with the industry. We weren't sure we were going to do it, and with the success, I think, of Run On Less and the interest, we'll get it done.
In the meantime, there's a great video you can check out at the NACFE website. Do you want to share that?
Yeah,
site?
so runonless.com is the event website, and there are 40 or around 40 2 to 3 minute videos on a lot of the technologies Joe and I have been talking about, a lot of interesting stories from the road that the truckers helped us with, like this drop and hook, like wind. So, the drivers are talking about the wind and so forth. And then there's a profile video. There's 7 profile videos about each truck, each specifications, and the driver. So I'd encourage anybody to spend a little time there. It's pretty interesting. Also, a couple that go through the results.
I would agree. I think there's some great stuff there. I've spent some time, and I'm going to spend some more. I encourage you to do the same. So in addition to the Run On Less program, NACFE also has a regular annual report, the annual fleet fuel study. So tell us about the latest fleet fuel study.
Yeah, so we issued our 6th in August. I can't believe it's been 6 years since we decided to do this. And what it does is it answers the adoption of these different technologies by fleets for tractor trailer fuel efficiency, freight efficiency, fuel economy. And so we have 19 fleets who operate over 75,000 tractors. And those 19 fleets share with us a lot of information. 85 technologies. We asked them, have you ever bought them? What % of your trucks did you buy them on in each year, all the way back to 2003. So we now have these adoption curves. So, and we actually calculate them 2 different ways, which is kind of a detail, but think about this in terms of 85 adoption curves for things like automated manual transmissions and tire pressure monitoring systems, and curved bumpers and diesel APUs. Those are some examples. And it helps the industry think about what others are doing. Some of these 19 pretty innovative fleets, but not completely innovative. And what are they buying, and what effect does that have on their fuel economy? And so it's a way to learn and even copy these fleets. There's a tool we provide that says, okay, here's the 19 fleets. Did they adopt the technology or not? How fast did they adopt it? So I always tell fleets, look at the top third and say, well, if they're buying it, why might I not be? And then look at the bottom third. If I'm buying those, they're not buying those, or not at scale, and try to figure it all out. So it's a little bit of a benchmarking tool there. And then you take the fleet fuel study and go into our confidence reports then. So if you say, okay, in the fleet fuel study, I really need to look at, trailer aerodynamics, then you can go, and we encourage people to go to our trailer aerodynamic confidence report to get all the details and real tools and total cost of ownership information there.
So now across all, across those studies, you've probably seen, some trends. Have you seen some surprises, things that maybe you weren't expecting, and maybe some?
Yeah, if you take a real long-term look at the last 15 years, I think idle reduction is the biggest surprise. We are seeing 3, if not 4, different solutions, occur, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. You look at one fleet and another, and one's doing battery HVAC and putting solar panels with it. Another is convinced that diesel APUs are the route. Others don't do either, and they do diesel-fired heaters for cold, and they really don't supply anything for hot sleeping, except maybe letting the truck idle if it's really hot outside. And then there's truck stop electrification. There's an emerging, start the truck up, cool the cab down, turn the truck off, the main engine in the truck, and it's a start-stop system. So, going into this 10 years ago, I'd have thought maybe, like a lot of others, that probably every truck would have a diesel APU, and we're far from that, and there's different solutions that are emerging. It's probably a good thing. Maybe the manufacturers would want one to win, but that might be a surprise. I mean, other than that, there's detailed, I guess the other big learning for us over the years is that, there's a price to the technology usually, and there's a fuel saving, but there's always a lot of other things that happen, and that's what we try to help the industry understand.
So are there things that maybe haven't caught on that have surprised you?
6x2s.
Yeah.
And I think there's a combination. It's a complex technology because almost always it affects your tire program. So now you're either putting lower resistance tires on the dead axle, or or other combinations of rotating tires around that 6x2. The liftable resale value is a challenge.
Right.
Traction can be a challenge or not, depending on things. And then maybe I mentioned fuel price, but some of those are a bit more complex than a side skirt on a trailer, where you put it on and it pretty much works for you. So maybe underestimating those barriers to adoption or those challenges for fleets is something that we've learned a little about.
Now, what about fuel prices? Because, over the course of, you said 6 studies, fuel prices have gone. They've been down, they've been up, and they've been down again. So how has that affected, what you see fleets doing?
Right. So this study is only 19 fleets, and they tend to stay the course. They were probably working on fuel economy before fuel economy made its run up to $4 in the early 2010s. And then they've kind of maintained it. Of course, they are using now $2.50 generally in a lot of their payback calculations, so it does affect their decision making. But they've kind of stayed the course. They will say things like, well, I don't want to go back and buy an old technology and then have to do a new one when fuel prices go back up. That's just too much work. It's too much training of technicians and drivers, finding different suppliers. And so when I buy it, if it's working for me, even though the fuel price is down some, I'll just stick with it. Others will say, around the greenhouse gas rule, that I'm probably going to have more of these technologies going forward. So if I do a little bit each year, that's better than just a whole new spec, in a few years. So, that's what we hear. But there's no doubt that lower fuel prices is making the adoption more challenging, forcing the manufacturers to come up with better solutions that that either perform better, cost less, or have less adverse consequences to make the adoption go.
And plus, the engines themselves are getting better. They're getting more efficient.
Yeah, they are, and so a lot of that affects a lot of things. The power to move a tractor trailer, with drag, rolling resistance, engines is going down. So, there's an opportunity to haul 2 trailers maybe with the power we have and the efficiency we have. But there's a lot of opportunities.
It's a great study, and NACFE is doing great work. I encourage you to check out the annual fleet fuel study, Run on Less, and all the great work they're doing. Mike Roeth, thank you.
Thank you.